apartment was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the clock above the kitchen door. Chicago's winter wind pressed against the windows, whistling through the gaps like a soft, uneasy breath. Daniel Hart sat in front of his laptop, the screen still glowing with the last line of the lecture he had been writing about emotional honesty. His phone buzzed. One message. "Don't wait up tonight." He stared at the text, the words small and neat on the screen. The kind of message one could send to a friend, a coworker, anyone, and it would mean nothing. But between husband and wife, it was different. It meant absence, distance, permission to not care. Daniel leaned back in his chair. The clock read 11:47 p.m. He rubbed his eyes, the kind of tiredness that came not from lack of sleep but from repetition. The same nights, the same excuses, the same silence after midnight when Clara would slip into bed smelling faintly of perfume he didn't recognize. He poured himself a glass of red wine and watched the light catch on the surface. The reflection wavered, his own face blurred by the liquid movement. "Don't wait up," he murmured, repeating it as if to test how it felt aloud. It was neither cruel nor tender, just hollow. He used to wait. God, he used to wait. In the early years, he'd stay up reading until she came home, pretending not to be worried, pretending not to count the minutes between her messages. But somewhere between the second promotion and the 5th anniversary dinner that never happened, he had stopped asking. He took a slow sip, the wine bitter on his tongue. From the living room, he could still see the wedding photo hung neatly above the fireplace, the two of them laughing under a canopy of autumn leaves. It looked almost foreign now, like a moment stolen from someone else's life. The phone buzzed again, briefly lighting up the darkness. This time it wasn't her. Just another automated reminder from his calendar. Guest lecture. Truth and deception in intimate relationships. He let out a dry laugh. The irony wasn't lost on him. Daniel was good at seeing lies. His students admired that about him. He could read micro-expressions, tone shifts, tiny inconsistencies people never noticed about themselves. But that talent, that sharpened perception, failed completely when it came to Clara. Or maybe, he thought, it didn't fail. Maybe he simply didn't want to see. He turned off the laptop and stood by the window. The city stretched below, a field of light and noise. But inside his chest, there was nothing but stillness. Clara's world was out there, the studios, the cameras, the interviews, the constant motion. His was in here quiet, measured, predictable. Two lives that no longer met except through polite nods and half-hearted smiles. Once, they used to talk about everything. The future, the books they loved, the color they wanted to paint the kitchen. Now, their conversations had shrunk to logistics, dinner reservations, laundry, travel plans. Words without weight. He picked up the phone again, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. For a moment, he imagined replying with something sharp, something that would sting. But he didn't. Instead, he set it down on the table and whispered to himself. It was easier to believe that. He walked to the bookshelf and pulled out one of Clara's old favorites, The Great Gatsby. The spine was worn, pages marked with her handwriting. In the margins, she had underlined a sentence, "I was within and without, simultaneously enchanted and repelled by the inexhaustible variety of life." He traced the words with his fingertip. That line used to be hers, now it was his. The clock struck midnight. The sound echoed softly through the apartment. Outside, snow began to fall, thin and quiet, covering the city in white. Daniel sat back down, staring at the empty chair across from him, the one she used to occupy during late dinners. Legs folded, hair messy, laughing over cheap wine. He tried to summon the image, but it flickered and dissolved. He picked up the pen lying on his desk and began to write in the corner of his notebook, a habit from years of therapy sessions with patients who couldn't say what they felt. He wrote a single line. "Love doesn't disappear. It decays." Quietly. Then he closed the notebook. At 12:23 a.m., headlights swept across the wall, a car pulling into the driveway. He heard the faint sound of heels on the steps, the turn of a key in the lock. Daniel didn't move. Clara entered, her perfume trailing behind her like a question he'd stopped answering. She paused when she saw him sitting there. "You're still up?" she asked softly. He smiled, gentle and unbothered. "I couldn't sleep." She nodded, setting her purse down, avoiding his eyes. "It was a long day." "I'm sure it was," he replied. His tone wasn't bitter, just tired. She hesitated, as if expecting him to ask where she'd been. But he didn't. The silence stretched until she finally whispered, "You should rest." "I will." When she disappeared into the bedroom, Daniel remained seated, listening to the sound of the shower running behind the closed door. The night pressed closer around him. He reached for his phone once more, reread her message, then deleted it. In the blank screen that followed, his reflection looked back pale, motionless, and utterly calm. Morning sunlight spilled through the blinds, cutting thin stripes across the marble kitchen counter. Daniel Hart stood there, pouring himself a cup of coffee, staring blankly at the rising steam. The TV murmured in the background the morning talk show Clara hosted every weekday. Her voice, warm and polished, filled the apartment like a melody he no longer recognized. "And that's what real courage means," she said, smiling into the camera, her posture elegant, every movement rehearsed, yet natural. The audience clapped, enchanted by her grace. Daniel watched, motionless, as the woman he once held close turned into an image, perfect, untouchable, and painfully foreign. Once, Clara used to wear oversized gray sweaters, hair tied messily, reading Neruda poems aloud while stirring soup on rainy nights. Now, she wore designer suits and the kind of smile that could sell headlines. She looked like someone who belonged to the world, not to him. He lowered the volume and leaned back against the counter, the coffee cooling in his hand. Their photos still lined the wall by the hallway, smiling, holding hands, eyes full of promises. Chicago's golden couple, a magazine had once called them. He was the brilliant psychology professor, she, the fearless journalist. Together, they looked like success itself. But success, Daniel realized, was quieter than loneliness. When Clara came home that evening, it was late. Her perfume arrived before she did not the scent he had given her last Christmas, but something sharper, unfamiliar. She tossed her keys on the table and smiled that same camera-ready smile. "Long day?" Daniel asked, voice calm. "Always," she said, taking off her heels. "We had a live interview with the senator. It ran longer than expected." He nodded. "Did it?" Clara didn't notice the pause. Or maybe she did and chose to ignore it. She walked past him toward the bedroom, the glow of her phone lighting her face. Her fingers typed fast. Then a soft chime, a message. She turned the screen slightly away from him before slipping it into her bag. Daniel sipped his coffee. "You changed your perfume." She stopped mid-step. "Oh. The network gave it to me, a sponsorship thing. Smells different," he said simply. She smiled, too quick. "You don't like it?" "I didn't say that." Silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. Then Clara turned off the hallway light and disappeared into the dark. Later that night, Daniel sat at his desk, pretending to read a stack of student essays. Words blurred into each other. The ticking clock was the only sound. From the bedroom came the faint click of phone keys, followed by the sound of Clara's quiet laugh. Soft, intimate, not meant for him. He closed his book. Daniel was a man trained to read people, their pauses, their micro-expressions, the flicker of guilt or fear behind the eyes. Yet it felt cruel, using that skill now. Every smile she gave seemed slightly delayed, every hug slightly shorter. At breakfast, he asked simple things about work, about her show, about whether she wanted to take a weekend off together. Her answers were short, efficient, like a reporter's script. And when he looked into her eyes, she looked everywhere else. The first time he saw the deleted text, it was by accident. Her phone lit up while she was in the shower. A preview flashed on the screen. "Can't wait to see you again tonight." He didn't open it. He just watched as the message vanished a few seconds later, deleted remotely. The sender's name, Mark. Daniel sat still for a long time, the sound of running water behind the bathroom door echoing like white noise. When she came out, towel around her hair, she smiled easily. "Want breakfast?" she asked. He nodded. "Sure." And he meant it. He wanted breakfast, and silence, and the time to think. That evening, Clara left again, working late. Daniel watched her car pull out of the driveway, headlights slicing through the mist. He didn't follow. Instead, he opened his laptop, found the photo of Mark, one of his former patients, a journalist who'd come to him a year ago after a public scandal involving infidelity and career collapse. Daniel stared at the screen. A slow, heavy realization sank in the kind that didn't make you angry, just tired. He closed the laptop. The whiskey bottle on the counter was half empty. He poured himself another glass, watched the amber swirl, and whispered to no one, "Perfect wife, perfect life." But the words sounded hollow, even to him. Outside, the city lights blinked like distant eyes, indifferent. Inside, the apartment glowed with quiet deceit, too clean, too staged, too calm. And Daniel sat there, listening to the silence that used to be love. Daniel had spent most of his career teaching people how to detect lies not through words, but through silence. The twitch of an eyelid, the subtle shift of tone, the moment someone inhales before they speak. Truth rarely hides in language. It hides in hesitation. And now, for the first time, he turned that skill toward his own home. Clara sat at the dining table that evening, scrolling through her phone while pretending to listen. Her fingers drummed the table light, rhythmic, distracted. Daniel asked, "You said the producer called earlier?" "Yeah," she said quickly. "He wants to move the Friday segment." Her voice rose slightly at the end, almost like a question. Her shoulders tensed. Daniel made a small note in his mind. Uncertainty when establishing timeline. He smiled, poured her a glass of wine, and didn't press further. Later, when she left for the studio, Daniel sat down at his desk. His notebook lay open, a leather-bound journal, where he usually wrote case notes about patients struggling with denial, guilt, and projection. That night, he began a new entry. Case 071, Subject C.H. Symptoms: emotional withdrawal, rehearsed affect, inconsistent eye contact. Observation: substitution of genuine intimacy with performative gestures. Diagnosis: cognitive dissonance between public persona and private identity. He paused, stared at the page, and underlined the last phrase twice. "Private identity," he whispered. "Who are you when the cameras turn off?" 10. When Clara returned past midnight, Daniel pretended to be asleep. He heard the faint click of her phone camera. Maybe a selfie. Maybe proof she was home. The mattress dipped beside him. Her perfume was faint now, replaced by something sterile, metallic, like hotel air. He listened to her breathing steady, eyes open in the dark. The next morning, while Clara showered, Daniel noticed a folder tucked beneath her vanity drawer, a small, cream-colored envelope filled with handwritten pages. He hesitated only a moment before unfolding the top one. The first line stopped him cold. "Dear Mark, I dreamt about you again last night." The handwriting was hers, rounded, neat, unmistakable. The letters continued, filled with emotional confessions that felt rehearsed and restrained, as if she'd written them to release something but never dared send them. She spoke of guilt, of not knowing how to stop missing you, of a man who understood her in silence. A phrase Daniel recognized because it was what Clara once said about him. Years ago. He read the signature once more. C. Then he saw it, a second letter, shorter, written later. The date was from only a month ago. "Mark, I wish you'd never left the newsroom. Maybe things would have been different." He folded the papers neatly and placed them back exactly where they were. No confrontation, no visible reaction. Only the quiet hum of understanding and betrayal settling into him like dust. That afternoon, Daniel went to his university office and searched his archived session notes. Mark Reeves, journalist, age 38. Patient history, infidelity, public disgrace, career fallout, followed by a brief attempt at therapy that ended abruptly. Daniel remembered the man well, charming, articulate, and fundamentally broken. He sat back in his chair, the pieces aligning in his mind with clinical precision. Clara and Mark had known each other before the scandal. They had covered the same political beat for years. When Mark's career imploded, Clara's rose. And now, perhaps, their connection had reignited under the cover of shared memory and mutual wounds. Still, Daniel felt no anger, only curiosity. That evening, he wrote another entry, patient relationship observed through indirect behavior. Possible emotional reattachment to former partner. Subject unaware of observation. Continue without confrontation. He closed the notebook, exhaled slowly, and allowed the detachment to wash over him, the kind he taught his students to maintain when analyzing pain. But this was different. This was self-preservation disguised as professionalism. When Clara came home, she found him reading by the fireplace. "Rough day?" she asked, slipping off her coat. He looked up, smiled faintly. "Not really, just observing human behavior." She laughed lightly. "Isn't that what you always do?" "Yes," he said, eyes following her as she crossed the room. "Always." For a brief second, she met his gaze and looked away too soon. Another tick on his invisible chart. That night, he dreamt of the first time they met. A psychology conference in Boston. A snowstorm outside. Her laughter echoing through the hotel lobby. She'd told him then that she loved how he listened, really listened. But now, years later, his listening had become a weapon. At dawn, Daniel woke before her. He watched her sleep, the calm mask of a woman at peace. And for the first time, he wondered if she was dreaming of someone else. He reached for his notebook on the nightstand, opened it to a fresh page, and wrote one line in neat, deliberate handwriting. Observation no. 27. She lies beautifully. Then he closed it, and the room fell silent, except for the sound of rain starting against the window. Soft, measured, relentless. Silence had become Daniel's weapon, not of aggression, but of precision. He'd learned over years of practice that when words stopped, people filled the void with their truths. Every night now, dinner was a quiet experiment. Clara would talk about work, about colleagues, about the new network deal. Her tone, light, rehearsed, carefully balanced between charm and control. Daniel listened, his face unreadable, a faint smile frozen in place. Sometimes, she would ask, "You're quiet tonight." As if she hadn't noticed that he'd been quiet for months, he would nod, sip his wine, and say only, "Just tired." It was the same phrase he'd heard from dozens of patients before they confessed something terrible. He began to take notes in his head, not on paper. The rhythm of her speech. The way she filled pauses with questions meant to redirect attention. The moments her gaze darted toward her phone, waiting for a message that never came when he was watching. The silence unsettled her. He could see it in the way she fidgeted. How she started filling evenings with calls she claimed were urgent. One Thursday, Clara rose from the table too quickly after dinner. "I'll be home late," she said. "The producer wants me to review edits for tomorrow's broadcast." Daniel looked up from his plate. "At his house?" She froze for half a second, long enough for him to register it, then smiled. "He has the home set up for after-hours work. It's faster." He nodded once, slowly. Of course. When the door closed behind her, Daniel sat in the living room for several minutes without moving. The faint echo of her heels down the hallway faded like a heartbeat receding into distance. He looked at the clock. 9:12 p.m. Then he stood, walked to his desk, and opened his laptop. The decision wasn't conscious. It was instinctive. The same kind of reflex he'd studied in patients who couldn't stop themselves from reopening old wounds. His fingers moved mechanically, typing commands, logging into Clara's cloud account. A small window opened. Password required. He hesitated, staring at the blinking cursor. He knew her passwords not because she'd told him, but because he'd helped her choose stronger ones years ago, back when she still asked for his advice. He entered the old one. Denied. He tried the new one. He suspected she'd changed it to their anniversary date reversed. Accepted. An empty inbox appeared, but Daniel knew how deletion worked. He activated a forensic tool, a simple recovery program he'd once used during a research project about digital confession patterns. The screen began to populate with fragments of old messages. Most were innocuous. Memos. Scheduling threads. Then one subject line caught his eye. I miss how simple it was. The sender, Clara Hart. Recipient, Mark Reeves. Timestamp, 3 weeks ago. He opened it. Sometimes I wish the world would stop watching us. You and I, we were honest in our lies, weren't we? I don't even know who I am anymore. He read it twice. The irony was almost poetic. She, the storyteller, confessing through written words that she'd never send. But what struck him most wasn't the affair. It was the tone. Exhausted. Lost. Fragile. Beneath the betrayal, he saw despair, the kind he'd counseled before, in people on the edge of emotional collapse. He sat back in his chair, staring at the reflection of his face in the laptop screen. The man staring back looked older, his features drawn and hollow. Who are you diagnosing now? He whispered to himself. The cursor blinked at him like a pulse. He copied the recovered messages into a separate folder, encrypted it, and shut the laptop. For the first time, he realized he wasn't sure why he'd done it. Not for revenge, not even for proof. Perhaps he wanted to understand her, or maybe he wanted to confirm that his love had died for a reason. Through the glass wall of the apartment, the Chicago skyline shimmered in the distance. Each window in those towers represented another life, another secret. He wondered how many people right now were sitting in similar silence, pretending everything was fine. At midnight, Clara returned. Her perfume filled the hallway before she did. Still awake? She asked softly. I couldn't sleep. She smiled faintly. You shouldn't wait up. I didn't, he replied. I was working. He turned the laptop slightly so she could see her reflection in its dark screen. Her face flickered there, poised, beautiful, but with a flash of unease in her eyes. She turned away first. Good night, Daniel. He nodded. Good night. When she disappeared into the bedroom, Daniel looked out the window again. In the glass, his own reflection overlapped with the city lights, fractured, multiple, dissolving into the skyline. He saw the outline of a man who had once believed silence could heal. Now, it only echoed back everything he refused to say. The house was asleep except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of streetlights bleeding through the blinds. Daniel sat on the couch, laptop still open on his knees, a half-written email frozen mid-sentence. His phone lit up with a single vibration, one message. Don't wait up. 3 words. Simple, polite, almost innocent. He stared at them for a long moment, his chest heavy with that familiar ache, the kind that came from pretending not to know. He inhaled deeply, let the silence stretch until it hurt, then typed back slowly. Hope you and Mark have fun. His thumb hovered for a second. Then he pressed send. The moment the message left his phone, the air in the room changed. It was as if the house itself knew. The device began to buzz, once, twice, then again and again, a frantic series of calls and messages. Clara's name filled the screen like an alarm. When the key turned in the lock, Daniel didn't move. He just listened. The hurried steps, the clatter of heels on hardwood, the sound of someone trying to breathe quietly while their heart pounded too loud. Clara appeared in the doorway, her face pale, eyes wide. The scent of her perfume, one he hadn't smelled in weeks, reached him first. It was sharp, floral, almost foreign now. Daniel. Her voice cracked. You're still awake. He didn't look at her right away. He just closed the laptop gently, placed it on the table, and finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were calm, too calm. You got my message? She asked, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I did, he said, and I replied. The silence that followed was suffocating. Clara swallowed hard. You read it? Daniel nodded once. I read it. Her lip trembled. She set her purse down, fingers shaking slightly. Daniel, it's not what you think. He almost smiled almost. Then what is it, Clara? Because I've been thinking a lot these days, and somehow my thoughts keep ending up at the same place. She stepped closer, as if distance could rewrite reality. It was a mistake. I was confused. Confused? He echoed softly. His tone wasn't mocking, but it carried weight. Clara, confusion is forgetting where you parked the car. It's not spending nights with someone else and telling your husband not to wait up. Her eyes glistened. Daniel, please, don't do this. Don't look at me like that. He leaned back on the couch, his posture steady. Like what? Like I'm already gone. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. The clock on the wall ticked once, twice. Outside, a car passed by. Headlights sweeping across the living room and washing both of them in a cold, transient light. It made everything look distant, two strangers caught in a moment that used to be love. Clara's knees buckled, and she sat down across from him. When did you find out? Long before tonight, Daniel said quietly. You're not as careful as you think. The perfume, the late meetings, the laughter you tried to hide, it all adds up. I just didn't want to believe it. She covered her mouth, tears spilling through her fingers. I didn't mean to hurt you. He looked at her, really looked. You didn't mean to, but you did. Every day you lied, you made me smaller. Every time you said you loved me, you built another wall between us. Clara sobbed softly, the sound breaking against the walls. Please, just tell me what to do. Tell me how to fix it. Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. There's nothing left to fix. You can't glue ash back into paper. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the city outside, distant traffic. The whisper of life going on as theirs quietly ended. Clara reached for him across the table, but Daniel stood up before her fingers could touch his. I'm tired, Clara, he said. Not angry. Just tired of pretending we're okay. She watched him walk to the hallway, the weight of his footsteps slow, deliberate. He paused at the doorway, glanced back once. I only replied to your message. Then he disappeared into the shadows of the house, leaving Clara sitting in the dim light, her hands trembling around the phone that started it all. Hours later, she was still there. The message glowed faintly on her screen, the words mocking her like a mirror. Hope you and Mark have fun. In the quiet that followed, the truth finally settled in, not with a scream, but with a whisper. She had lost him long before tonight. Not because he stopped loving her, but because she taught him how. The house was still. Only the sound of the rain brushing against the windows kept Daniel company. It was past midnight, and Clara had finally cried herself to sleep in the next room. Her breaths shallow, uneven, like a child after a nightmare. Daniel sat at the edge of his desk, laptop open, the faint blue glow casting soft shadows across his face. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, maybe a reason, maybe an ending that didn't feel so hollow. Her email was still logged in. The tab blinked in the corner of the screen, almost inviting him in. He hesitated, fingers hovering over the trackpad. Snooping felt wrong, childish, invasive, but so did everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. He clicked. The inbox was clean, curated. Clara always cared about appearances, every folder neatly labeled, every photo filtered before posting. But when he opened the drafts folder, it was chaos. Dozens of unsent messages. He scrolled through them slowly. Some were only a few sentences, raw and half-finished. I wish I could tell you what I really feel, but I'm afraid you'll stop looking at me the same. Sometimes I want to scream just to hear an echo to prove someone still hears me. Others were long confessions, written like diary entries, time-stamped over months. They painted a portrait of a woman suffocating in her own silence, trapped between guilt and hunger for attention. Then he found one that stopped him cold. Subject: to Daniel, never, sent. He opened it. I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe because it's the only place I can still be honest. You don't yell anymore. You don't even argue. You just walk away. Sometimes I want to break something just to make you look at me. I miss the way you used to care even if it meant fighting. I thought maybe if I crossed a line, you'd finally see me again. I thought your anger would prove I still mattered. I hate myself for this. But worse, I hate how invisible I've become. Daniel read the words twice, then a third time. Each line felt like a quiet confession wrapped in self-destruction. His throat tightened. He had expected anger. But what came was something heavier. Sorrow. Almost pity. He leaned back in his chair, eyes tracing the ceiling as the rain grew harder outside. For years, he had believed that silence was strength, that love meant restraint, patience, calm. He had learned to swallow emotions, to choose peace over passion, and in doing so, maybe he had built a marriage so quiet that even pain couldn't echo inside it. He opened another draft. Mark doesn't make me feel loved. He makes me feel seen. I don't know which one I need more. Daniel exhaled sharply, the breath shaky. The sentence didn't sting, it exhausted him. Because beneath every betrayal was not desire, but emptiness. He clicked through a few more messages. Some were addressed to no one, written in fragments like thoughts she couldn't say aloud. If love is supposed to be a home, why do I always feel like a guest in mine? Maybe I should just disappear for a while, see if anyone notices. He stopped scrolling. The weight of her loneliness pressed against his chest like a physical thing. For the first time in weeks, he looked toward the bedroom door. Clara's silhouette was faintly visible through the cracked doorframe, her back turned, one arm hanging loosely off the bed. She looked small, fragile, almost peaceful. He remembered when she used to write to him back when they were young and reckless, still believing that love could fix everything. She used to send him long, messy paragraphs full of dreams and fear and laughter. Somewhere along the way, her words had become drafts, unsent, unheard. Daniel shut the laptop gently, his hands trembling. He walked to the window. The city outside was washed clean by rain, buildings glistening under streetlights. Traffic reduced to a soft hum. Somewhere below, a couple argued in the rain, their voices carried faintly through the night. He envied them, at least they still had sound. He thought of the email's last line again. I just wanted you to be angry to know you still loved me. A single tear slipped down his cheek, unnoticed. It wasn't forgiveness that filled him, nor hate. It was the crushing realization that maybe both of them had failed the same way by mistaking silence for peace and distance for maturity. Behind him, Clara stirred in her sleep, murmuring his name softly. For a brief second, Daniel almost went to her. Almost. Instead, he stayed by the window, watching the city breathe beneath the rain. He whispered to no one in particular. You were never invisible, Clara. I just forgot how to see you. The rain answered with another hush, washing away what words couldn't. Morning light slipped through the blinds, cutting pale stripes across the room. Dust floated lazily in the air, suspended between silence and sunlight. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, watching Clara sleep. Her face, once a familiar map of warmth and laughter, now looked foreign, as if the years between them had quietly redrawn every line. He could hear the city waking outside. Cars, a distant siren, the hum of a world that kept moving, no matter who broke inside it. Yet in that small bedroom, time felt frozen, the air thick with everything unsaid. Clara's hand twitched in her sleep, her lips parting slightly as though she were murmuring to someone who wasn't there. Daniel felt an ache he couldn't name. It wasn't love. It wasn't even sorrow. It was recognition, the painful kind that comes when you finally see yourself clearly, reflected in someone else's ruin. He realized that for all the ways she had betrayed him, he had betrayed her too, only more quietly, more elegantly. His betrayal wore the mask of patience, of understanding, of intellect. He had loved her like a psychologist loves a subject, with fascination, with distance, with control. He used to tell himself he was studying human emotion, observing without judgment, but somewhere along the line, he had turned their marriage into a case study. He noted her patterns, her moods, her silences, not to understand her, but to manage her. He wondered how long she had known. In the mirror across the room, their reflections lay side by side, his upright, her sleeping. Two people who used to share dreams, now merely shared space. He looked at himself. The calm expression, the composed shoulders, the mask of the rational man. Beneath it, there was something else, the exhaustion of someone who had spent too long pretending to be unbreakable. He thought of the drafts he'd read last night. Her unsent words still echoed in his head. I wanted you to be angry. I wanted to know you still loved me. He swallowed hard. He had thought his silence was noble, that by staying calm, he was choosing the higher road. But silence, he realized now, was also a weapon. It stripped her of the right to be heard, to be seen. It turned their marriage into a museum exhibit, preserved, analyzed, lifeless. He stood up, walked toward the mirror, and studied his reflection more closely. The faint lines around his eyes, the graying stubble, the tiredness that no amount of sleep could fix. He whispered to his own image. You made her invisible. Clara stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then softening when she saw him. Daniel? She murmured, voice hoarse from crying. He didn't answer. He just looked at her, really looked. Did you read them? She asked quietly, her gaze shifting toward the laptop still half open on the desk. Yes, he said simply. She didn't cry this time. She just nodded, almost relieved. Then I guess there's nothing left to hide. Daniel walked to the window, hands in his pockets. You wanted me to see them. Maybe, she said. Maybe I just wanted to know if you'd notice. He turned back. You wanted me to be angry. A faint, broken smile touched her lips. I wanted you to feel something. For a long time, they just stared at each other. No yelling, no excuses. Only the unbearable truth of two people who had loved each other wrong. I wasn't better than you, Daniel said finally. His voice was low, even. You think I forgave you out of love, but I didn't. I forgave you because it made me feel superior, like I was the one in control. Clara's breath caught. Daniel, I studied you, he continued. Every gesture, every silence. I told myself I understood you better than anyone. But the truth is, I was just dissecting you, turning you into data. And I called that love. Tears welled in her eyes. Then we both destroyed it, didn't we? He nodded. Yes. You broke the vows. I broke the soul. The honesty between them felt like glass sharp, transparent, impossible to touch without bleeding. Clara pulled the blanket closer. So what now? Daniel looked out the window again. The city shimmered in morning light, indifferent and alive. Now, he said softly. We stop pretending. He walked back to the mirror and stood before it again. Clara followed his gaze. In the reflection, they looked like strangers standing in the same photograph, two survivors of the same quiet war. He reached out, his hand almost touching her reflection, not her skin. You know, he said, this mirror has been lying to us for years. Every morning we looked into it and believed we were okay. Clara let out a shaky laugh that turned into a sob. And what do you see now? He paused, eyes fixed on the reflection. Two ghosts, he whispered, still pretending to be married. Neither of them moved. The room felt lighter somehow, as if the truth had opened a window neither of them knew was there. Daniel finally turned toward her, his face unreadable but gentle. Clara, I'll tell you everything, what I knew, what I did, what I felt. But once I do, we can't go back. You understand that, don't you? She nodded slowly. I don't want to go back. Outside, the light brightened, filling the room with an unflinching clarity. Inside, two people stood before the mirror, no longer looking for reflection, but for release. The studio lights were blinding, too white, too honest. Daniel sat beneath them, his palms resting quietly on his knees. Around him, a dozen crew members adjusted cables, whispered into headsets, and counted down the minutes until air. The talk show, Truth in Modern Love, had been Clara's creation, a program about relationships, vulnerability, and the human psyche. It was ironic, Daniel thought, that he was here now, invited to speak about truth, when truth itself had already burned their marriage down. Across the room, behind the glass of the control booth, Clara stood with her arms folded. From this distance, she looked like a statue, elegant, composed, untouchable. Only Daniel, who had memorized the small betrayals of her body, could see the tremor in her hands. 2 minutes, the producer said. Daniel nodded. He glanced toward the monitor that displayed Clara's reflection. For years, she had been the one telling other people's stories, the compassionate voice for strangers. Today, she would have to listen to her own. When the red light blinked on, silence filled the room like pressure in the chest. "Good evening," said the host, smiling too brightly. "Tonight, we're joined by Dr. Daniel Hart, psychologist, author, and relationship counselor. Daniel, thank you for being here." He inclined his head slightly. "Thank you for having me." The host continued. "We've titled this episode, When Love Becomes Performance. Dr. Hart, you once wrote that silence can be as cruel as betrayal. Can you tell us what you meant?" For a moment, Daniel almost said something safe, clinical, distant, professional. But then, he felt the weight of Clara's gaze from the control booth, and something inside him shifted. He exhaled slowly. "I meant that sometimes, people stop fighting not because they've forgiven each other, but because they've given up. They start performing the idea of a perfect marriage, smiling at dinners, posting anniversary photos, pretending. But behind that, there's nothing left." A ripple went through the audience, a collective, uneasy stillness. The host tilted her head. "Are you speaking from experience?" Daniel's lips curved into something almost like a smile. "Yes, I'm talking about a couple I knew. They were admired, successful, articulate, everything people aspire to be. But the truth is, they were suffocating each other in silence." He paused, his eyes never leaving the glass where Clara stood. One night, the wife told her husband not to wait up, and he didn't. Instead, he sent her a message, one that changed everything. The audience leaned forward. The host frowned slightly, uncertain whether this was confession or metaphor. "What did he say?" Daniel looked straight into the camera. "Hope you and Mark have fun." A small gasp rippled through the crowd. In the control booth, someone turned toward Clara, but she didn't move. Her face had gone completely pale. Daniel continued, voice calm, deliberate like a surgeon narrating his own operation. That night, the truth didn't explode. It unfolded quietly, almost tenderly, and they both realized the marriage had been over long before that text. The affair was only the symptom. The real disease was distance, pride, fear. The host hesitated. "Did they both broke each other." Daniel interrupted softly. "He, with silence. She, with action. Neither wanted to win, but neither knew how to stop losing." The room was painfully still now. Every sound, the hum of the lights, the distant shuffling of the crew seemed magnified. "Did they ever forgive each other?" the host asked finally. Daniel's eyes softened. "Forgiveness isn't the opposite of pain. It's the moment you stop needing to be right." The host opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say. The camera slowly zoomed in, Daniel framed in white light, his expression unreadable. Behind the glass, Clara's eyes glistened. For a brief second, their gazes met across the gulf of light and shadow. Neither of them smiled. The red light above the camera blinked off. Cut. Applause began polite, hesitant. Daniel stood, nodded to the host, shook a few hands. The crew moved around him, busy and oblivious. He looked up again toward the control booth. Clara was gone. He walked through the backstage corridor, the echo of his footsteps hollow on the polished floor. The walls were lined with posters of Clara, her poised smile. Her signature tagline, "The truth sets you free." He almost laughed at the irony. At the exit, he found her coat still hanging on the rack, the beige one she always wore to early shoots. He reached out, touched the fabric, then let it fall. Outside, the Chicago air was sharp and clean. The night hummed with city life sirens, distant laughter. the rhythm of a place that didn't care who was breaking apart. Daniel stood on the steps of the studio, his breath fogging in the cold. He imagined Clara walking away somewhere in the city, her heels striking pavement, tears cooling before they reached her collar. He didn't know if she hated him, or thanked him, or simply understood. Maybe, he thought, that was the truest kind of ending. Not forgiveness, not closure, but the quiet recognition that they had finally stopped lying, even if it cost them everything. The wind picked up. Somewhere behind him, a billboard flickered with the show's slogan, "Truth in modern love, every story has two sides." Daniel looked up at it for a long moment, then turned and walked into the night. The apartment no longer felt like a home. It had become an echo chamber, every sound bouncing off the walls as if searching for someone who was no longer there. The faint scent of Clara's perfume lingered in the hallway, a ghost of peonies and something sharper, something like regret. Daniel stood by the window, watching the city wake beneath the dull gray of dawn. The streetlights flickered out one by one, but inside, nothing changed. Clara had left the night before. No tears, no words, just the quiet shuffle of her suitcase wheels against the hardwood floor, the whisper of the door closing for the last time. Daniel had stayed in the kitchen, staring at the untouched glass of wine he had poured hours earlier. One for her, one for him. Only one remained. Now, the silence stretched endlessly, like a film paused mid-frame. He could almost see her there, standing by the counter, hair still damp from a shower, scrolling through her phone as she laughed at something she didn't share with him. There had been a time when her laughter was the sound he lived for. Somewhere along the way, it had become the sound that reminded him how far they'd drifted. The ping of his laptop broke the stillness. An email. The subject line, "Before you delete my name." He hesitated before clicking. The message was short, just a few paragraphs, but each word landed with the precision of a blade. "I'm not sorry for what happened. I'm sorry for turning you into someone you're not. I made you my mirror, the place I went to see the worst in myself, and when I couldn't stand that reflection anymore, I tried to break it. That's what betrayal was for me, not rebellion, not desire. Just a desperate way to feel something real. I don't know if you'll ever understand that. Maybe I don't either. But I hope, one day, we both stop fighting ghosts." There was no signature, just a blank space where her name used to belong. Daniel leaned back in his chair, reading the message again and again, until the words blurred into the hum of the refrigerator and the faint traffic outside. For the first time, he didn't feel anger. He felt nothing. Or maybe the absence of everything. He walked through the apartment, touching the surfaces she used to claim the vanity covered with little bottles of perfume, the dent on the couch where she always sat cross-legged editing her videos, the mirror by the front door where she used to check her lipstick before leaving for work. Each object seemed to hold a memory he couldn't live in anymore. The coffee machine clicked to life automatically at 8 a.m. Just as it always had a remnant of their old routines. Daniel poured a cup out of habit, then set it down untouched. The steam rose, then disappeared. He noticed the house keys next to the wine glass. The metal caught the light, simple, ordinary, final. He reached for them, feeling their weight. They were cold, but not heavy, just like her absence. His phone buzzed once a calendar reminder. Anniversary. Dinner. 7 p.m. He stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then, almost tenderly, he deleted it. Outside, the city continued as if nothing had happened. A couple argued near a parked car. A child laughed, chasing a dog across the crosswalk. Somewhere, life kept happening, messy, relentless, indifferent. Daniel sat on the couch and opened his notebook, the one where he used to draft lecture notes about behavioral psychology. The last page was blank. He picked up his pen, hesitated, and then began to write not analysis, not observation, but something raw and unguarded. "We broke long before the affair. We broke when silence became easier than truth." He stopped, looked at the line, then closed the notebook. In another part of the city, Clara might be unpacking, hanging her clothes in a new closet, trying to find comfort in a place that didn't know their story. Maybe she'd check her phone, half hoping for a reply. Maybe she wouldn't. Daniel didn't know. He only knew that the apartment no longer smelled like her perfume, only dust and distance. And maybe that was mercy, the slow fading of what once burned too bright. As the sun rose higher, light filled the room, catching the rim of the wine glass. The red had dried to a thin, dark ring. He left it there, not as a reminder, but as a witness. Some endings don't announce themselves with slammed doors or shouted words. Some just sit quietly in the morning light, waiting to be accepted. Daniel exhaled, long and steady, then whispered into the empty room, not to be heard, but to release what was left. "Goodbye, Clara." The city answered with silence, and in that silence, something inside him finally let go. The classroom smelled faintly of chalk dust and coffee. Daniel stood behind the podium, adjusting his notes as the students settled into their seats. Outside, Chicago's skyline glimmered through the tall windows, a city that never paused, but occasionally offered moments of stillness to those who looked carefully. Daniel looked up from his slides. The words, "self-reflection in modern psychology," projected in sharp white letters on the screen, and allowed himself a quiet exhale. It had been a year since Clara left, a year since the apartment had become a space of echoes and absent voices. And yet, life had carried on, inexorably forward, like water tracing the curves of a riverbed. He had returned to teaching, to research, to the rhythm of his own mind. The pain had dulled into something quieter, a careful awareness of love's fragility and a recognition of the human need for both connection and release. Meanwhile, in Maine, Clara's voice flowed through the cameras of her new show. She no longer covered celebrity gossip or polished, idealized stories of love. Instead, she sat with ordinary people, those who had betrayed or been betrayed, and guided them to confront their actions. Her voice was steady, compassionate, and reflective. "Some forgiveness," she said in the closing moments of her last episode, "doesn't need to be spoken aloud. Sometimes, it is understood in the reflection we see in another, in the change we witness in ourselves." Her words traveled across the states, over airwaves and fiber optic cables, and reached Chicago in fragments of memory Daniel carried with him. He thought about the silences between them, the messages, the emails, the apartment that had grown empty, and the invisible ledger of wrongs and confessions they had each kept. And now, in that same silence, he found the clarity to observe life without the weight of expectation. The students were asking questions about cognitive dissonance, about empathy, about the ways people justify their choices. Daniel answered carefully, using examples from his research, sprinkling in gentle observations about human behavior. Knowing that these lessons were as much for him as for them, he moved slowly, deliberately, aware of the sound of his own voice in the large lecture hall. A soft ping interrupted the rhythm of his thoughts. The inbox icon blinked insistently. He saw the sender, Clara. He did not open it immediately. Instead, he let his gaze wander to the city beyond the window. The glass mirrored back the reflection of the buildings, the late afternoon sun catching in windows, cars moving like small, persistent pulses of life. He finally turned to the message. It was simple. "Thank you for letting me see myself. No more. No explanations, no apologies. Just a single acknowledgement that, in their shared past, they had facilitated each other's understanding of flaws, of regrets, of growth." Daniel did not reply. There was nothing to say. Instead, he closed the laptop, rested his palms on the edge of the podium, and watched the city breathe. The skyline, familiar yet distant, reflected a man who had learned to release, to watch, and to continue without bitterness. He thought of Clara, somewhere in Maine, her hair tied back, leaning slightly toward the camera, listening carefully to the stories of strangers, guiding them with the same gentle yet firm patience he had once admired. She was building something new, and in doing so, she had given herself the freedom to let go of what could not be repaired. Daniel allowed himself a small, ironic smile. Their paths would never cross again, not really. And that was exactly how it should be. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no cathartic confrontation. There was only reflection, understanding, and the quiet acceptance of what had been. He glanced down at his students again, noting their attentive faces, their questions, their curiosity, their mistakes yet to be made. He felt a tenderness for them, for humanity, that was sharper now, precisely because he had lived through his own intimate failings. There was no bitterness in his heart, only a deep awareness that life moves forward, and that every human encounter leaves an imprint, however subtle. The city outside deepened in color, transitioning from the harsh clarity of day into the muted calm of evening. Streetlights blinked on, casting long shadows that mingled with the reflection of office towers. And Daniel felt the unusual sensation of stillness, a peace that came not from resolution, but from honest observation. He thought of the empty apartment, the echo of footsteps down the hallway, the cold touch of keys and wine glasses left behind. And then he thought of Clara, and a single, simple truth settled. They had survived each other's absence. They had learned, and in the learning, they had been freed. Daniel turned back to his lecture notes, adjusted the microphone, and continued speaking. His voice was calm, deliberate, and quiet. A slow rhythm that carried more meaning than words ever could. Outside, the city continued, indifferent, luminous, infinite. And inside, in the quiet of his classroom, Daniel felt a reflection of the past, of mistakes, and of growth. He let it pass, as all reflections must, and for the first time in a long while, he did not wait for anyone. He looked out the window one last time. The skyline mirrored itself in his eyes. The lights steady, the streets moving, the city alive. And in that mirrored silence, he found the completion of a story that had begun with betrayal and ended with understanding. No letters needed to be opened. No apologies needed to be spoken. They had seen each other truly, and that had been enough. The lecture hall quieted. Daniel exhaled, long and slow, feeling the day settle over him like a soft, forgiving blanket. He straightened his jacket, collected his notes, and watched the sun descend over Chicago, silent, reflective, and finally free.